I think the first thing that we've learned is that doing large-scale multi-institutional writing transfer projects is way challenging. It's very difficult, and the amount of coordination that's required to take a study beyond a single site is, I think, beyond anything that we initially expected. So I just want to say there's sort of like a methodological component.
I have had a great experience collaborating with the people that I do collaborate because, with the exception of one, I've known them for years. And we've always sort of worked together and helped each other. So that has not been a new part of this, and so that's been easy. But during this whole project, I've finished being a grad student, begun to pay off student loans, moved to a different region of the country, and pretty much spent all my money getting all that done, right? So, having some funding for research and having more, I have a little bit, very little bit, but having more of that would have been smarter. And it wasn't one of the things I found time to do as I was finishing up a dissertation. I wish I had the forethought to have looked into that a little bit more, because I'm, finding that I'm going into my own pocket for. The thing with multi-institutional research is, you can do a lot of it without traveling, but there's nothing like going there and researching the students in person. You get more out of that than you do via Skype or email. You can follow up that way, and sure, you can do an interview by Skype, but if you were doing a set of interviews, some of that has to be personal, or you just don't get the same effect. And so you're going to spend money. And it always comes down to money. Everything does. But but that's what I would recommend, is just to think about the longer term for it. And that's the other thing. I keep building on my original plan, and I keep expanding or thinking of ways it could be expanded. And at some point, it's going to expand beyond the scope of my own finances. So I have begun to look for opportunities. But if you think bigger than you think it will ever be. And don't limit the possibilities by just thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to do this year. I've learned to think much bigger, and then you think about organizing things differently. You think about possibilities rather than just doing what you're doing in that moment. And then, of course, financially, you think about opportunities that way as well.
The context at each institution is going to have major implications for the research that you do and the extent to which you can treat each data point as equivalent. We tried really hard to make sure that the questions were the same, but there are just lots of little differences that you don't even see until later. And just something like the student backgrounds is going to play a big role. For example, one of the things we're interested in is not comparing achievement levels, but rather gains made.
What I've learned along the way is just to be aware of the nuances of different institutions. So private versus public, but and size of institution, but mostly the students that go there. I find that we describe students at an institution, we sort of paint them all with the same brush, to use a horrible cliche, but they are much more than we sort of characterize them as. And the ones that, in particular, that participate in a study like this or are motivated to participate in research are interested in ways that others aren't. And it's really beneficial to try to keep an open mind about every single research subject, no matter what the institution type is, and you start to see patterns among just students or the age group, the college age generation, if that's primarily what you're working with, that go beyond the institution, which is really interesting.
There's a lot to it. Coordination and making sure that everyone has a shared ideological framework is actually one of the most important things. So if we are coming with different definitions of what it means to transfer, or if we want to use the term at all, because there's been contention about whether the term itself is a problem, if we don't have that shared vision, then we did, so that was easy, but I could see how that would break down. A lot of time is in person. Like the Elon seminar has been wonderful for that, and the project wouldn't have happened without it. But also making use of technology. So we've been using like a program called Deduce for shared coding and access to our data, which is wonderful because it's an online program. So, and Google Docs and Skype and anything that can bring us closer and connect. So there's sort of the pragmatic stuff like that. But I also think the other thing that we learned that was really valuable was to give space and time to really understand each other's programs. So we were developing a writing rubric. And actually, I was the one who went into this thinking, oh, well, it's a writing rubric. Let's just take let's take some of the WP outcome statement and some other things. And this should be easy after spending all these weeks and months developing our codes. And actually, that ended up being really difficult because we realized that our writing programs actually had different goals, especially when we were looking at like my upper division peer tutoring course, and the kinds of documents those students were writing were so radically different than, say, what students were writing at George Washington, that we had to really think carefully about how do we analyze writing that comes across the disciplines from different contexts to understand if transfer is happening. And so that ended up being one of the things I think that threw me personally through a loop. And now looking back on it, it's like, well, yeah, of course that would be that. But I think that those just giving space and time for those kinds of discussions, not rushing things. And then also distributing work would be the last thing I'd say. We've been very successful in getting grants and in writing and really just moving the project forward, data collection, supporting each other, partly by recognizing when each of us has work to do and when we have more time to devote to it. So like we have one person who's really free in the fall, I'm really free in the summer, and so we develop our time based on that, and that's really helpful too, because I'm on a full-time grant all summer to do the project, so I'll do a lot of the analysis, but I didn't do as much of the writing for one of the articles because I've been really busy teaching and administrating things, and so those kinds of things have to happen too.